The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the humid summer air, punctuating the most ridiculous moment of Evelyn Hartridge's life. Two police officers stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, their expressions a mix of confusion and mild embarrassment, while her neighbor, the notorious HOA president Barbara Simmons, looked on with a triumphant smirk. "I'm telling you, this is my house, my pool, my property." Evelyn's voice cracked with frustration. Her designer sundress was still damp from swimming, water droplets forming small pools on the pristine concrete around her. Officer Rodriguez exchanged a glance with his partner. "Ma'am, we received a call about a potential break-in. Ms. Simmons reported an unidentified individual trespassing in a private pool." "You've identified?" Evelyn wanted to laugh, but the cold metal of the handcuffs killed any potential humor. She had lived in this neighborhood for 7 years, and Barbara Simmons had been her personal tormentor for every single one of them. The neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates was no ordinary suburban development. It was a meticulously controlled ecosystem of rules, regulations, and passive-aggressive email chains. Every blade of grass, every exterior paint color, every garden decoration was subject to the most stringent scrutiny imaginable. And at the center of this controlled chaos sat Barbara Simmons, the HOA president, who treated her position like a military command. Evelyn had always been a rule follower. Her house was a testament to compliance. White exterior, precisely trimmed hedges, not a single decoration out of place. But today, she had committed the ultimate sin. She had used her own pool on a day that wasn't her designated swim time. The HOA bylaws were crystal clear. Each homeowner was allocated specific hours for pool usage, carefully staggered to prevent overcrowding and maintain community harmony. Evelyn's allocated time was Tuesday and Thursday mornings between 7 and 9 a.m. It was currently Saturday afternoon, a cardinal sin in Barbara's meticulously ordered world. "This is harassment," Evelyn said, her voice low and controlled. "I've lived here for 7 years. I pay my dues. I follow every single ridiculous rule in this neighborhood." Barbara stepped forward, her immaculate white tennis outfit pressing against the perfectly maintained lawn. "Rules are rules, Evelyn. You know the pool schedule. Just because you own the property doesn't mean you can swim whenever you want." Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, can you provide some identification?" Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. How had a simple afternoon swim turned into a police intervention? She knew Barbara despised her, partly because Evelyn's marketing firm was more successful than Barbara's husband's real estate business, and partly because Evelyn had once challenged a nonsensical HOA regulation about mailbox colors. As she was about to be escorted back inside to retrieve her ID, Evelyn realized this was more than just a pool dispute. This was war, a carefully orchestrated attack designed to humiliate her and reassert Barbara's iron-fisted control over the neighborhood. Little did Barbara know, Evelyn was about to fight back. And in Willow Creek Estates, a battle of wills was about to begin, one that would challenge the very fabric of their tightly controlled community. The aftermath of the pool incident spread through Willow Creek Estates faster than wildfire, carried on the winds of neighborhood gossip and meticulously curated group chat threads. By Monday morning, Evelyn's reputation hung in a delicate balance, with whispers and sideways glances following her every move. Her home office became a war room. Stacks of HOA documents, bylaws, and correspondence covered every available surface. Computer screens displayed spreadsheets, email chains, and property records, each document a potential weapon in her brewing conflict with Barbara Simmons. "They want a paper trail." Evelyn muttered to herself, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'll give them a paper trail." Her first move was strategic. A formal complaint filed against Barbara Simmons for false reporting and abuse of HOA authority. Each word was carefully chosen, each accusation backed by meticulous documentation. She highlighted the costs incurred, police time, her own professional reputation, the emotional distress of being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. The HOA bylaws were her Bible now. She knew them better than the people who had written them, discovering loopholes and inconsistencies that would make a corporate lawyer proud. There was the curious clause about pool usage that Barbara had conveniently interpreted, a clause that actually had more gray area than the HOA president wanted anyone to know. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mark Reynolds, her closest ally in the neighborhood and the only other homeowner who had ever dared to challenge Barbara's reign. "Heard what happened. Need backup." Evelyn smiled. Mark was a retired lawyer who had moved to Willow Creek Estates 3 years ago, quickly becoming a thorn in Barbara's side. He understood bureaucratic warfare better than most. "Meet at Cafe Bella in an hour," she typed back. "Bring your HOA files." The cafe was mutual territory, technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction, which made it the perfect meeting ground for neighborhood resistance. Mark was already seated when she arrived, a thick manila folder spread across the table, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "They've gone too far this time," Mark said of that preamble. False police report, clear harassment. We might have a legitimate case. Evelyn ordered a cappuccino, her hands still slightly shaking from the weekend's events. The barista gave her a knowing look. News traveled fast in small communities, and Willow Creek Estates was nothing if not a small community with outsized drama. Mark slid a document across the table. It was a detailed timeline of Barbara Simmons' increasingly aggressive HOA enforcement for the past 5 years. Frivolous fines, unnecessary citations, reports to local authorities for minor infractions. A pattern was emerging, one of calculated intimidation. She's been doing this for years, Mark explained. Most people are too afraid to fight back. They pay the fines, they comply, they stay silent. But Evelyn wasn't most people. Her marketing background had taught her that every battle was winnable with the right strategy, the right messaging, the right evidence. We're not just fighting a pool schedule, she said, her voice low and determined. We're fighting a system of neighborhood tyranny. Outside the cafe window, Willow Creek Estates looked peaceful. Perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, not a leaf out of place. But beneath that pristine surface, a revolution was brewing, and Evelyn Hartridge was about to light the first spark. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night, and Willow Creek Estates hadn't seen this much anticipation since the great landscaping controversy of 2019. The community center's parking lot overflowed with vehicles, some belonging to longtime residents who rarely attended meetings, others to the usual HOA regulars who lived for these moments of neighborhood drama. Evelyn arrived early, a thick binder tucked under her arm, and Mark Reynolds trailing behind her like a seasoned legal advisor. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, side-eye glances, and the unmistakable tension of a community about to witness a confrontation. Barbara Simmons sat at the head of the table, her perfectly pressed navy blazer a stark contrast to the growing unease surrounding her. She'd always been the undisputed queen of Willow Creek Estates, but tonight felt different. The whispers were louder, the stares more pointed. The meeting will now come to order, Barbara announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her gavel came down with unnecessary force. Evelyn's mind raced back to the pool incident. The handcuffs, the humiliation, the false police report. Each memory fueled her resolve. Mark had coached her perfectly. Don't attack, he'd said. Present. Document. Expose. When the floor opened for new business, Evelyn's hand shot up. I'd like to address a matter of significant concern regarding recent HOA enforcement practices. The room went silent. Barbara's smile was razor-thin. Ms. Hartridge, please proceed. Evelyn stood, her marketing training kicking into high gear. She wasn't just presenting a complaint, she was telling a story. The story of neighborhood overreach, of power abused, of residents systematically intimidated. She began by detailing the pool incident, not with anger, but with clinical precision. Each fact was backed by documentation. The unnecessary police call, the lack of probable cause, the clear violation of her property rights. But she didn't stop there. Mark had helped her compile a dossier of Barbara's previous infractions, excessive fines, arbitrary rule changes, selective enforcement that seemed to target specific homeowners while giving others a pass. This isn't about a pool schedule, Evelyn said, her voice steady. This is about a pattern of harassment that undermines the very community we've all invested in. The documents she presented were damning. Emails, police reports, financial records showing the disproportionate impact of Barbara's enforcement. Each page was a nail in the coffin of Barbara's absolute authority. Homeowners who had previously sat in silent submission now leaned forward. Mr. Thompson from 2 streets over nodded. The Garcias exchanged meaningful glances. Even Barbara's usual supporters looked uncomfortable. I'm not asking for special treatment, Evelyn continued. I'm asking for fair treatment, for transparency, for a return to the principles this HOA was founded on. Barbara's composure began to crack. Her fingers, usually so precise, now tapped nervously on the table. The room could sense a shift. The carefully constructed facade of absolute control was showing its first real cracks. A hand went up from the back of the room. Helen Martinez, a retired school principal known for her no-nonsense attitude, stood up. I'd like to second Ms. Hartridge's concerns, Helen said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd managed hundreds of rebellious teenagers. The dominoes were beginning to fall. As the meeting continued, Evelyn realized this was about more than a pool. This was about reclaiming the community from the grip of petty tyranny, and she was just getting started. The aftermath of the HOA meeting spread through Willow Creek Estates like a carefully calculated virus. Information, rumors, and half-truths ricocheted between neighborhood group chats, over backyard fences, and during hurried morning conversations by mailboxes. Barbara Simmons knew she was losing control. Her husband, Richard, a mid-level real estate broker with more hair product than spine, watched her pace their immaculate living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked their perfectly manicured yard. a yard that had won Landscape of the Month 6 times consecutively. "You need to do something," Richard said, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "This Hartridge woman is dismantling everything you've built." Barbara stopped pacing. Her fingers traced the edge of a crystal award from the Neighborhood Association Leadership Conference, a memento that suddenly felt more like a mockery than an achievement. She had a plan. The next morning, Evelyn found the first envelope in her mailbox. Cream-colored, expensive paper stock, the kind used for formal legal documents. Her marketing training had taught her to recognize a strategic communication when she saw one. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy, an official notice of violation. Apparently, her swimming pool's fence did not meet the exact specifications outlined in Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws. The fence was 2 inches too low. The color was marginally off the approved palette. The gate's self-closing mechanism didn't meet the precise technical requirements. "Ridiculous," Evelyn muttered, but she knew this was Barbara's counterattack. Mark Reynolds examined the document over a quick lunch at Cafe Bella. His legal eye caught every nuance, every carefully constructed phrase designed to create maximum inconvenience. "She's trying to bury you in paperwork," he explained. "Create so many technical violations that you'll be forced to spend thousands bringing everything into compliance." Evelyn understood the game. In the world of HOA warfare, paperwork was the ultimate weapon. Each violation carried a potential fine. Each required correction meant additional expense, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. But Evelyn had her own strategy. She began documenting everything. Photographs of the fence from multiple angles, precise measurements, historical compliance records. She hired an independent inspector to verify her property's condition, a neutral third party who could challenge Barbara's claims. The neighborhood watched and waited. Some neighbors quietly supported her. The Garcias left a casserole on her doorstep with a supportive note. Mr. Thompson accidentally left copies of old HOA minutes that might prove useful in her defense. Others remained neutral, too afraid of potential retribution to take sides openly. Barbara's next move came swiftly. An emergency HOA board meeting was called, ostensibly to review property compliance standards. But everyone understood the real purpose. This was about putting Evelyn in her place. "She thinks she can challenge the system," Barbara muttered to herself while preparing her presentation. Spreadsheets, bylaws, detailed infractions. She would crush Evelyn's resistance, restore order to Willow Creek Estates. What Barbara didn't realize was that some systems are meant to be challenged, and Evelyn Hartridge was exactly the wrong person to underestimate. The battleground was set. The weapons were bylaws, legal documents, and sheer determination. And in the carefully controlled world of Willow Creek Estates, a revolution was brewing, one fence measurement at a time. The county courthouse was an imposing brick building that had seen its share of neighborhood disputes, nothing quite like the case about to unfold. Evelyn sat beside Mark Reynolds, her legal ally who had volunteered to help her challenge the HOA's most recent barrage of violations. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Marketing pitch for Johnson Tech dropped. They heard about the HOA drama. Of course they had. In a world of LinkedIn and local gossip networks, reputation was everything. The pool incident and subsequent HOA war had become something of a local legend. Evelyn realized she was fighting for more than just her property rights. She was fighting for her professional credibility. Mark leaned in, his voice low. "Remember, we're not just challenging a violation. We're exposing a pattern of harassment." The hearing room felt like a pressure cooker. Barbara Simmons sat across the aisle, her perfectly pressed blazer a shield against potential vulnerability. Her husband Richard sat behind her, looking more like a nervous support staff than a partner. The administrative law judge Margaret Holbrook was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s. She'd seen countless HOA disputes, but something about this case felt different. "Ms. Hartridge," Judge Holbrook began, "you're challenging multiple property violation notices issued by the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." Evelyn's response was calculated. "Your Honor, I'm challenging a systematic pattern of selective enforcement designed to harass and intimidate homeowners." Mark had prepared her well. Each violation was methodically dismantled. The fence measurement dispute. Their independent inspector proved it was within acceptable tolerances. The gate mechanism, fully compliant with local building codes. The paint color, exactly matching the approved palette. But the real ammunition was the documentation of previous incidents. The unnecessary police call. The pattern of targeting specific homeowners. The inconsistent application of HOA rules. Barbara's facade began to crack. Her confident demeanor slipped, revealing the bureaucratic bully beneath. When cross-examined, her responses became increasingly defensive, increasingly desperate. "Ms. Simmons," the judge interrupted, "can you explain why a police report was filed for a homeowner using her own pool?" The silence was deafening. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Several other HOA board members who had accompanied Barbara looked like they wanted to disappear. During a short recess, the courthouse hallway became a battlefield of whispered conversations. Neighborhood residents who had come to watch the proceedings huddled in small groups. The Garcias, Mr. Thompson, Helen Martinez. They were no longer just spectators. They were potential allies. Evelyn's phone continued to buzz. Incoming messages, emails, some supportive, some curious, some from potential clients wondering about her ability to handle pressure. She thought about her marketing firm, about the resilience required to build a successful business. This HOA dispute was just another negotiation, another challenge to be strategically navigated. Mark returned from a conversation with the court clerk, a slight smile playing on his lips. "They're recommending mediation," he said. But the tone has shifted. We're no longer on the defensive. As the hearing resumed, Evelyn realized this was about more than a pool, more than fence measurements, more than HOA bylaws. This was about community, about standing up against petty tyranny, about refusing to be silenced. Barbara Simmons had picked the wrong person to mess with, and Willow Creek Estates was about to change forever. The mediation process transformed Willow Creek Estates like a slow-burning wildfire. What began as a dispute between Evelyn Hartridge and Barbara Simmons had become a neighborhood-wide reckoning. A neutral conference room at the local municipal building became ground zero for change. Long tables filled with HOA board members, homeowners, and legal representatives created an atmosphere thick with tension and possibility. Barbara arrived with her usual armor, crisp navy blazer, perfectly coiffed hair, a leather portfolio that looked more like a weapon than a document holder. Evelyn sat across from her, calm and prepared, Mark Reynolds beside her like a seasoned general. The mediator, a retired judge named Marcus Holloway, had seen countless neighborhood disputes, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about a pool or a fence or bylaws. This was about power. "Let's be clear," Holloway began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. "We're here to find a resolution that serves the entire community." Evelyn's documentation told a story far more complex than a simple HOA dispute. Spreadsheets revealed a pattern of selective enforcement. Email chains exposed arbitrary rule changes. Financial records showed how certain homeowners had been systematically targeted. Richard Simmons, Barbara's usually silent husband, shifted uncomfortably. He'd always lived in the shadow of his wife's Everwood presidency, but the public exposure was becoming unbearable. The first crack came unexpectedly. Helen Martinez, the retired school principal who had initially supported Evelyn, presented her own set of documented grievances. Turns out she wasn't alone. The Garcias, Mr. Thompson, and 3 other longtime residents had similar stories of harassment and selective enforcement. "This isn't about rules," Helen said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "This is about control." Barbara's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Years of unchecked power were suddenly being dissected, examined, exposed. The mediator's recommendations became increasingly clear. The HOA board needed a complete overhaul. New bylaws, transparent enforcement, an independent review committee. During a break, Evelyn received a call from the CEO of Johnson Tech, the client she'd thought she'd lost during the height of the HOA drama. "Your handling of this situation," the CEO said, "shows exactly why we want to work with you. Someone who can navigate complex systems, stand up to bureaucratic nonsense, and come out on top." The contract was back on the table. As the mediation continued, Richard Simmons made a surprising move. He quietly slid a folder across the table, internal documents that further exposed his wife's years of overreach. "I'm done," he whispered to Evelyn. "She's gone too far." The final recommendations were devastating to Barbara. Removal from the HOA board, a complete audit of past enforcement actions, potential legal consequences for false reporting and harassment. Willow Creek Estates would never be the same. Outside the conference room, neighbors who had lived in silent fear for years began to speak, shared stories of intimidation, quiet acts of resistance. A community was finding its voice. Evelyn understood this was about more than winning. This was about creating change, about standing up to bullies, about reclaiming community from those who would use power to control rather than unite. The pool incident that had started it all now seemed like a distant memory. Something far more significant was happening in Willow Creek Estates.